As you fly over into the Middle East airspace, the captain makes an announcement like any captain on a Qantas plane. And I remember I was just sitting there looking down at my camouflage uniform, just thinking, this is real, this is it, I'm finally here. Situation on the ground, it was nighttime and you could see the explosives going off. And I remember just looking out the window with body armour and a helmet.
Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
They were building positions in there
if
for
anything
a
happened
fight.
to us, by the time anyone got to us,
I think it was chaos.
the weather was so bad there would be
I used to
nobody
run
left.
with boots full of blood.
And the next thing I hear was alarms,
Chances of
screaming.
survival were very, very slim.
The soldiers didn't want to go into the ambushes, so they'd send the kids in first. And so he was sent in first into an ambush and he got shot in the stomach.
It was very hard for me, very hard for my family. And the plane burst into
Proud of the
flames.
crew, proud of what I've achieved and what I'm
To
doing.
volunteer for service was in effect to put your life on the line.
Today, I spoke with Cassie Collins, a mechanic turned officer of the Royal Australian Air Force. I'm Alex Lloyd, and I'm speaking today with Cassie Collins. Cassie, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Morning, Alex. Thank you.
Where did you grow up, Cassie?
I was born in Wagga Wagga, regional New South Wales. I lived on a farm with my mum, my dad, and a little sister who's about 2.5 years younger. About 11 or 12, I moved up to the Sunshine Coast because my parents were chasing Sunshine Coast lifestyle. And then from there, I completed high school up on the sunny coast.
What was the farm lifestyle like?
It was fantastic. We had to drive a four-wheel motorbike to the end of our driveway to catch the school bus to school, and every weekend we're helping Dad build farm fences and sort of fix trucks and proper farm work. We'll put to work as children.
So quite a hands-on childhood. And
Yes, yeah, very much so.
Was the Sunshine Coast more of a holiday?
It was sort of daunting moving up there, and I told my parents I hated them both for missing my friends and I'll never make new friends. But then within 6 months I had new best friends and a new circle and was going to the beach, so it just became normal again.
What kind of hobbies were you into as a kid?
Probably the most long-term hobby would have been ballroom dancing, which is a bit odd because I grew up a tomboy. So to put the fake tan, the hair and the big ball gown on, I did that for a fair few years, compared to the Australian titles in 2003, placed in one of the events. Apart from that, every other hobby you could think of, a bit of a sports fan really.
I think that's a good, healthy mix, though. Being handy with farm fences and being sporty and then finding yourself on the dance floor.
Yeah, I think I get bored easily. So whether it's tennis for a semester at school and then I ring mum and tell her now it's going to be soccer and she has to go out and buy new equipment, she's very impressed.
Do you have any military history in your family?
It was only recently I found out my mother's father, so my grandpa, was OO1 Army, artillery, and that's about all I know. He never did any wartime service, but he also never spoke about his Australian service. And then from there he went on to just be a farmer for the next 55 years. So apart from that, that's really all I have in the family.
Where then did your interest in the military come from?
I was studying accounting at the Sunshine Coast University and I was in the lecture theatre and I looked around, a very boring lecture, and thought, this is not me. So went ahead and deferred studies with every intention to finish a degree, and then sort of went and did a FAMIL visit. So it's where you go and familiarise yourself and you get to visit a military base and look at military aircraft. And I was pretty much in awe of this large aircraft, which we now know as a C-17. And I sort of thought, well, I quite like fixing things and this is pretty cool. How do I join? And then someone told me that I wouldn't make it through recruits. And I was like, well, where do I sign?
Challenge accepted.
Yep.
And then you rise to that challenge. Is that first initial experience seeing the big plane that interests you in the Air Force in particular, or why that branch over another branch of service?
I think going back to your question before about do I have any sort of family in the military, at that point I had an incoming stepbrother, 10 years my senior, who took me on that tour, and he sort of gave me a bit of an overview of what the Army, Navy and Air Force was like from his perspective, albeit skewed because he was Air Force. And I tended to agree with him on sort of the reasons why Air Force would be the best suit. And plus aeroplanes, I just really enjoy aviation.
Tell me about your training.
So in July 2010, I got on a plane got off at Wagga Wagga in New South Wales, where the Air Force do their recruit training. It was raining, it was freezing cold, and I remember it vividly. And as soon as I grabbed my bag off the conveyor belt, there was a man in uniform yelling at me. And then I got on a bus, was shipped about 5 minutes up the road, and then 10.4 weeks of recruit school started. It wasn't sort of as horrible as the movies make it out to be with yelling and screaming and kicking, but it also wasn't just sitting around in a classroom like I used to at uni. So it was pretty confronting, but also very rewarding. So as soon as I graduated recruit school, I went up the road to what's known as RAF School of Technical Training to do my mechanical training. Within the first few weeks, everything that the instructors were saying was super interesting, and I sort of compared it to accounting, where I just was watching the clock for the entire lecture, going the ins and outs of how an aircraft turbine system works or the hydraulic system works. It just somehow interested me, and I couldn't get enough of it, essentially.
So you go from being handy on the farm to handy in the hangar bay. When do you finish your training?
So I graduate on the 11th of the 11th of the 11th at 11 a.m. So we did a Remembrance Day ceremony before we graduated and marched off with our certificate in Aeronautical Engineering Mechanical. And then from there I posted to 36 Squadron, which is at RAF Base Amberley, just sort of west of Brisbane, to work on the C-17. So I was lucky enough to get my first preference. The reason I joined the Air Force, and I put that down as a first preference, I then ended up being a mechanic on the C-17s.
So can you describe a bit for me your day-to-day at Amberley?
Sure. So I lived about half an hour away, sort of in the suburbs of Brisbane. So it'd be an early morning, drive into work. It's just like any other job. And then every morning we'd have a team briefing. So where one of our engineers would sit down with a bunch of the maintainers or technicians and sort of hand out jobs. So whether there's aircraft arriving that were broken, we knew what was broken. So we'd sort of get tasked with different jobs. So, Group A, a tyre, and something on the engine, and Group B, and on another aircraft it needs a refuel and lubricating the undercarriage and the tyres. And then from there we grab our tools and go out and start our day fixing aircraft.
Did you face any kind of cultural barriers coming in? I mean, go back 30 years ago, you wouldn't have found many women mechanics in defence. Did you face any kind of confrontation like that when you were training or early on?
I was well aware of it from very early on at my technical training at Wagga. At one point, I was the only girl in a classroom of about 16, which personally didn't worry me. I grew up on a farm with a lot of farm hands and my dad's friends and neighbours' sons, so I was always surrounded by males. There was no real adversity being a female, I don't think, because I came from that background and I was comfortable with it. When I did first post into the squadron, one of the senior engineers pulled me aside and just said, hey, look, we know there's only 3 females in all our mechanical trades. My door is always open. And at first I thought it was a throwaway line, but it happened to be true. I never needed a reason to go through the door, but it was lovely knowing that as, a nervous 21-year-old going into the Royal Australian Air Force, there was someone like higher up who was a boss to look after me if I needed it.
Still, from a purely statistical point of view, being a mechanic must have been a bit of a boys' club. Was there any feeling early on for you, oh, is she really pulling her weight? Can she?
I guess posting into a new squadron's daunting for anyone of any gender, and I didn't realise the lack of females in my trade. At 36 Squadron, there was approximately, I think, 80 to 90 mechanics of all trades, and when I got there, there was 2 other females. And then one shortly after that went on maternity leave. So it was just myself and another lady called Rachel, who we got on like a house on fire. But I guess early on I was cautious that I probably wasn't as strong as the boys, and there were some tasks as a mechanic on a C-17 that I physically couldn't do without getting to the gym. And I was also conscious about pulling my weight, not wanting to prove myself as such, but just prove myself in a profession that I'd just begun and sort of have a positive reputation for being a good mechanic and not finishing my training and sort of being mediocre. So certain tasks where it's sort of like a 2-man lift of an item onto the axle of the C-17, I sometimes struggled at that, but the other guys in the team were happy to help as long as they saw me giving it a go. So if I had just stood there and said, lift it on for me, the response would have been incredibly negative.
And colourful.
Yes, very much so. And being mechanics on a flight line, very colourful. But the fact that I was giving it a red hot crack and getting in there, and out of the entire team of the same task, I was always the dirtiest, and I would just come back completely covered in grease or hydraulic fluid or whatever I was working with. So I think I really felt like I wanted to be good on a professional level and also a personal level. So, my peers enjoyed working with me, not felt like I was a burden to them.
That if you saw any chance to get oil on your face, you'd dive into it.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Everyone in the military needs to prove themselves, and that's it's a culture of pressure that's encouraging to bring out the best in yourself and for everyone to give to the team. Did you feel the need to overly prove yourself? Did you have to prove yourself on an extra level?
I didn't realise so much before I joined the military, but after I was in the Air Force, we're an organisation of extreme high achievers who are perfectionists, and we have to be. So, a pilot can't accidentally make a mistake flying an aeroplane, or my job, I can't forget a nut or a bolt in my job. So we are incredibly professional and perfectionists. So although I did feel some pressure very early on to be a very good aircraft technician, so I got the respect of my peers and my bosses, it was more on a professional level, knowing that possibly people's lives were in the balance of a mistake I could potentially make if I wasn't competent at my tasks. But being a female played into it a little bit early on. But once 6 months in the job, I feel like the rest of my team were, pretty impressed with some of my skills and my knowledge. And after that, I essentially became gender neutral. So I wasn't one of the boys, but I also wasn't the only girl on the team. It was just, hey, Cass, go and change that tyre. Or, hey, Cass, we're going out for dinner tonight. Do you want to come? So it took a while to sort of them to figure out where I placed myself in the team. And then once they became comfortable with me and I became comfortable with them, it was essentially like working with 10 big older brothers, who very smelly, dirty older brothers, but yeah, very much older brothers in the end.
And then on a Saturday night, you could have a shower and put a dress on and remind them who you are underneath the grease.
Yeah, I always enjoyed doing that because I think my mum had always spoken to me about this as well, thinking that, you say to someone over the phone or over a podcast, you're a military Air Force mechanic, and they stereotype just as you would with any other trade or industry. And then they see you on a Friday night out with your girlfriends with high heels and a nice dress on, hair and makeup. And it really confuses everyone how you can sort of be this grease monkey by day and, a standard female by night. So I quite enjoy having the two, like my professional life. I'm very roll your sleeves up, get in there. And then my personal life is cheese and wine, fine dining.
Has the pendulum shifted the other way over your career that you've observed? Are we overcorrecting?
A lot of senior mentors that I look up to in the Air Force are women, some men, some women, and I know they had it hard, and the Air Force has done a lot of work to ensure we're this incredible workplace that sort of fits into the 21st century, both culturally and technology-wise. So I know that it's been a long road and we still probably have a little way to go, but in some areas, yes, my personal opinion that we have swung too far the other way. We needed it, and we still need sort of the diversity of gender programs that we have in the Air Force, but there are certain things where I believe we're overcompensating to make up for the past, whereas it'd be nice to have some consultation with currently serving females to see what we think at ground level would work best. There was a pilot at 36 Squadron who was a captain on the C-17s who is an absolutely incredible lady, incredible pilot, and she was always my biggest fan. Even if I hadn't decided to follow her career path of the pilot world, she would always come in and check on me and say, how did the moving house go, or how are the boys annoying you this week? And then when she found out I was transferring over to pilot, it was more of a, I'll take you under my wing. Sorry. And she was she was incredibly pleased that she could help someone who she saw a lot of herself in at my age. So, yeah, there are women out there that sort of amaze me of what they've been able to achieve.
And on that comment before about the pressure, that you're right, if you miss, I want to sort of really draw attention to this, that if you miss like one bolt, then a small part within an aircraft can come undone or stop working correctly, and then that's one tiny cog in the great machine, and then that larger cog then stops working because a part of it's broken down, and that can lead to a chain reaction that can have catastrophic consequences that comes from one minor oversight. There's
Absolutely.
A lot, and that all comes back to you.
Yeah, it does. And then that's very daunting. When I first got to the real squadron with a real flying aircraft, not just training aids in a hangar in Wagga, I was very, very cognizant of that fact that you're taught from day one when you join the Air Force attention to detail, whether it's in the ironing of your uniforms or the neatness of your hair, or that all the bolts you pulled out have then gone back in. You don't have a pocket full of leftover. So there's a little bit of pressure there, but I quite enjoyed the high-performing aspects of the Air Force. So there's other jobs in and outside the Air Force where, you know, if you make a mistake, no big deal. You can shred it and retype it or whatnot. But I think I really enjoyed the high expectations of perfectionism and professionalism of being an aircraft mechanic. It's very much part of the reason I think that I still chose pilot as well. It's high-performing perfectionism when you're flying an aircraft as well.
Tell me a bit more about the C-17. I want to visualise this massive beast that you're working on.
Right, so one of the first tasks you learn to do when you first arrive at the squadron as a brand new technician is marshalling an aircraft, so waving the wands. You're told to stand there and you're under direct supervision from a senior corporal possibly, and he sort of guides you through marshalling it in. So it's taxiing, all 4 engines are roaring, and it's taxiing towards you, albeit at a very slow walk, probably 5-10 miles an hour. And as it gets closer to you, you're meant to stand your ground and marshal it in and stop at about 20 feet in front of you. And I found myself just walking backwards, looking up. Like I couldn't stand there and watch this massive aircraft with a huge wingspan and 4 engines coming towards me, and just it didn't feel okay to just stand there and look at this gigantic aircraft. And then after a few years of doing it, you kind of sort of in your head you're going through what you're going to cook for dinner while you're doing it. So I guess it's like any other task. In the beginning it seems ridiculously daunting, but after that it just becomes like a normal job.
What's your first deployment with 36 Squadron?
My first deployment, apart from the domestic bases around Australia, would have been to the Middle East. We fly over to supply a bunch of cargo to the Middle East region as a whole. There's a myriad of countries that the C-17 flies in and out of, and a part of the crew, apart from the pilots and the load master, they always take maintainers with them to ensure the safety and security of the aircraft, and if it does break, it can be fixed so the mission is successful. And I was lucky enough to be put on a crew to fly over to the Middle East a few times. That was super exciting because part of the reason I joined was to deploy. So I was finally getting to do what I trained so hard to do. It was very exciting.
How long would you be over there for on a typical deployment?
So it's very unusual the way my old squadron deploys, anywhere between a week to 2 weeks. So the way the C-17 works, we're a global airlift, so we don't need to be there for 3 to 6 to 9 months. We just fly over with a whole lot of cargo, drop it off, fly home. So it's a whole lot of individual missions to drop off stuff.
You graduated barely 10 years after 9/11, and now you're finally deploying over to the Middle East and supporting our operations over there. Did you have any reflection on you're now in these missions that are essentially a part of history 10 years on?
Absolutely. So I was getting up and getting ready for school. I was quite young, and Mum had the news on as she does every morning, and she was just paused in front of the television, glued to it, and sort of said, I think you guys should come look at this, to the rest of the family. So I remember 9/11 very vividly. It's not until I grew up and sort of was late in my teen years that I realised what an impact that had on a global scale and on us in Australia. But yeah, for sure, I remember as you fly over into the Middle East airspace, the captain makes an announcement like any captain on a Qantas plane. And I remember I was just sitting there looking down at my camouflage uniform, just thinking, this is real, this is it. I'm finally here. I get to do something that I'm super proud of doing. And yeah, there's definitely a moment of reflection the first time you fly into the Middle East on a military aircraft in a military uniform.
What was the atmosphere like on base?
It was electric. At this point, there was like a lot of people there. We were starting to move different aircraft around, and it was a busy period my first time over there. And it was really refreshing as I got off the plane and walked into the camp to see the Australian flag everywhere. There was a coffee shop, which we were lucky enough to have, a little bit of home comfort over there. And it was just nice to see other people in the same uniform with the same flag on their shoulder as you, but also get to meet Americans and English and other forces. So it was really enjoyable.
Are there any other particular memories from that first deployment that stand out to you?
Standing out on the flight line, waiting for the refuel truck, so standing beside the C-17, waiting to refuel it, and the dust storm was rolling in from the north, and it was hot. It was very dry. The sun almost disappeared behind these dust clouds, and I believe it was about 51 degrees Celsius. And I'd watched scenes like this on the local news for the last 10 odd years, and I was kind of living something that I'd always seen on the news. So it was made me feel a bit more respect for, the previous 10 years of operations that we've carried out in the Middle East, how arduous it can be at times.
Actually, yeah, what time of year were you over there? I'm trying to get a picture of the landscape and from the aerial point of view as well as you're flying in and flying out.
Yeah, definitely. So I believe it was July. I made a point of looking out the window a lot, although there's not that many windows. And it's just as you see it in the movies or the news reports, it's just arid desert, the odd palm tree. And in Australia, we have paddocks of cows. Over there, they have paddocks of camels. So it was completely different landscape, unlike anything I'd seen before anywhere else in the world.
Did you ever fly into the Middle East under any adverse conditions?
Once we were flying into Iraq, and at some point it became quite dangerous. Although we were quite high in the aircraft ourselves and we were under no threat or any safety risk. The situation on the ground, it was nighttime and you could see the explosives going off. So we took certain precautions in the aircraft, and I remember just looking out the window with body armour and a helmet and just feeling really proud of the crew, proud of what I've achieved and what I'm doing. And it was probably the one moment in my entire career where I actually felt that I was in the military and I was seeing the front line. Although I wasn't a part of it, I was at least seeing it. And it was just such a privilege to be a part of that and to help a country like that out and to wear the same uniform many others have worn before me. So then we flew into Iraq, did a delivery, for want of a better term, and then returned. On another trip to the Middle East, though, it's never quite as smooth as that. Not everything goes to plan. So we got halfway home from the Middle East and we were diverted to a completely different mission. So we left Australia Christmas Day, about 10 a.m. And then about 4 days later, we got turned around and re-diverted to Italy. And then from Italy, we were at the UN staging base there where the logistics is, and we were taking shipping containers in and out of South Sudan when they had the breakdown in South Sudan. So we were one of the only aircraft and militaries around the world over the Christmas period that responded to the request from the South Sudanese and the UN of providing aid. So that was pretty incredible to be halfway home to Australia and then to be re-diverted and be staged out of Italy for about 3 weeks.
Just for the listener, can you provide a little bit more background on the Sudan situation at that time?
Yeah, so it's called Operation Aslan. It continues as we speak. It is the UN's way of helping stabilise the country, provide aid. So what we did, we provided aid, and in the shipping containers there was tents, water purification kits, bottled water, and anything else, food rations that you could want. At that point, there was thousands and thousands of displaced civilians living in camps, and they were running out of supplies. So it was incredible to be a part of a mission that was helping people, and they were in dire needs. And we pulled up at the South Sudan airport in Africa, and I'd never been to Africa. It was an incredible moment to think, 3 days ago I was in the Middle East heading home and now I'm in Africa providing aid. It was really wonderful. Everyone was waving at you from the fence and it was fantastic.
Well, it's quite a personal landmark moment for you that you've come from the farm, you've seen the plane in the hangar and gone, oh, geez, that looks cool. I want to get involved in that. And now you're on another continent giving humanitarian aid to those direly in need. Is that your proudest moment in uniform?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. It was knowing we'd had a direct impact on those people's lives. I heard stories from other Australian Defence Force members that had been living in South Sudan for the past 4 months, how they were sort of on their last bottles of water and on their last tins of food. And they said without this delivery this week, people would have started to deteriorate and possibly die. So it was absolutely incredible to know that everyone on that C-17 crew, pilots and aircraft technicians and loadmasters, had a direct impact. And if one of us happened to not be there, the mission may not have happened successfully.
I want to get a bigger picture of your life back home as an Air Force mechanic. What does the rest of your squadron look like on base? What are the career opportunities for you to try and find a new challenge within that or push through the ranks? I'm just trying to fill in the details.
So the squadron back home, I think, has approximately 200 people, ranging from logistics and supply through to admin support, pilots, life support, which do sort of the oxygen masks in the aircraft, mechanics. So there's everything you could think of. And there's plenty of opportunity for promotions and posting to other aircraft. But for myself, I sort of saw pilot as the most challenging out of what the Air Force had to offer, the most exciting. I really enjoyed my job as an aircraft technician, but I felt like I needed more of a challenge. So then from there, I looked at what our pilots did on the C-17, and I thought that's absolutely fantastic, how they're under constant stress and pressure, and not only flying an aircraft like that, but also maintaining morale of the crew and safety of the crew and planning. So I went down the path and I applied to be an Air Force pilot. I'm a very hands-on person as well, so whether it was fixing them or flying them, I thought that I'd kind of be really good at either, and fully aware of how difficult the process was to even get in and get a spot on pilot's course. I was pushed along by a lot of colleagues, other pilots and friends and family to apply for pilot and just see how it goes.
And so in 2015, you commissioned to pilot, but were unsuccessful in graduating. For the civilian audience as well, can you explain the distinction there of commissioning to pilot but not fully becoming one?
Okay, so when I applied for pilot, I applied for the position as a pilot, went through the officers training school at East Sale, graduated that with a commission, and then I went on to complete my pilot training. About 6 months into that, I was unsuccessful. So essentially I failed from pilot's course. And then because I had a commission, there was a whole other range of jobs and possibilities apart from being a mechanic that were now opened. And then from there, I chose what we call an operations officer or an OPSO. And then that career, I found the best mix for someone with my aviation background, my mechanical skills, to essentially manage pilots and manage aeroplanes and still be organising and heavily involved in the aviation sphere. And that's turned out to be completely rewarding as well.
And when we say you were applying to be a pilot, it's not exactly going and trying to get your driver's license. Becoming a pilot in the Royal Australian Air Force is incredibly demanding, and a lot of people want to do it. Do you know at all, or at least anecdotally, how many people apply for it, how many women apply for it, and what the pass rate is like?
Absolutely. So when you say you apply for a job, people think, hand in a resume, go for an interview. That's maybe 1% of the application process for pilot. So it took almost 2 years through aptitude testing, math testing, medicals, psych testing, psychological testing. And then when you get there, you sort of think that you're over the hurdle, but it's only really just beginning. So I believe when I first sort of Googled it, there was about 1,000 people apply every year. And out of that, there's approximately 126 people every year start on pilot's course. And of those, I believe 70% of males pass and only 50% of females pass pilot's course. So worldwide, we're known as one of the more challenging military flying schools in the world. And our selection process is, I would say, the hardest to pass in the world.
Why do you think there's that statistical disparity?
Between men and women? I put it down to now being on the inside as well and being there and failing it is learning styles. We have a set amount of time to learn the curriculum, and if you fall below that curve, you then fail. There is plenty of chances for remedials and assistance, and it's a pretty good program. But I believe for me, it was like drinking out of a fire hose, and the teaching style is very much aimed at the school leaver who had grade A's, who's most likely going to be a male with a deep-seated history in aviation. So coming in as a female with a late love for aviation, I think maybe that different learning and different teaching techniques don't quite mesh, and in that compressed time frame, there wasn't enough time for me to learn the content.
Now, although you didn't pass pilot course, did you still find it a positive experience? I mean, what could you take away from it?
It was incredibly positive. In the beginning, I was completely devastated that I didn't pass. As you could imagine, it takes 2 years to get in, and then 6 months of the hardest work I've ever done in my entire life. So, 3 to 4 hours a night, every night studying 6 days a week. And it was devastating. But I take away incredible amounts of achievement, like this overwhelming feeling I've achieved. Like even just getting a spot on pilot's course, I look back now and think it's incredible. Invaluable aviation experience, intimate knowledge of how to fly an aircraft. So I feel like now in my current job, I I know what pilots are going through and I know how they fly. I know what aircraft technicians are going through and I know how maintenance is carried out on an aircraft. And I feel like I'm the guy in the middle, or girl in the middle, that sort of puts it all together and ensures that when an aircraft comes to the RAF base that I manage, it's seamless. The pilots are looked after, the aircraft is looked after. So I've got a lot out of pilot's course, and if I could go back and do it again, there's not a whole lot I would do differently. I think just the fire hose effect was just not for me.
Tell me where you go to from there.
So from here, I post down to a unit called Air Training Wing and I start to reevaluate my career options. I contemplated going back to being an aircraft technician because I really love that. But I also thought what a complete waste of time and money and brain power that all this learning in the aviation environment was, in the piloting environment and the officer environment. So OTS teaches you great leadership and, personal qualities. So I thought, maintain my commission and go into a career that suits my personality. I love people, I love talking, and I love organising, and I also love aviation. And the perfect fit for me in the organisation now, I found, is operations officer. So from there, same process, less difficult, but I still had to apply for operations officer and conduct a boarded interview. Then from there I was selected and did a 5-week course in how to manage aerodromes and flying squadrons.
And that's what you do today?
That's what I do today. So I'm currently posted to the Air Force Base at East Sale, about 3 hours east of Melbourne here in Victoria. And I manage the base operations, so visiting aircraft, ensuring they have a spot to park, fuel, accommodation for the crew, as well as base events and media events, graduation parades, sort of a jack of all trades.
Talk me through the human leadership aspect of your current role.
So currently in my role, I have 3 staff that work with me. And I say with me because we're all a part of a team that on any given day, one of us could be out of the office. We're not sort of chained to our desks. So I might go down to a flight line and meet the crew of a visiting C-130 Hercules aircraft to ensure that they have everything they could need. Or another member of our team could be at the front gate signing in an older veteran because his mother's ashes are laid to rest on our RAF base. So it's pretty fun. I get to mentor and lead junior airmen. I also get to work with high-ranking Air Force officers. So I feel like I'm in this incredible position where I have access to every trade, every specialisation within the Air Force at my base, where I could be talking to a pilot 1 minute and then a member of the public the next. So it's pretty dynamic. It keeps you a bit busy, and that's what I love because I get bored incredibly easy.
What's the next challenge you want to aspire towards?
The next challenge I would really like to achieve is something on an international platform, but still wearing the Air Force uniform. So whether it be an exchange posting overseas to share knowledge and work with other Air Forces around the world, or just deploy from a more permanent perspective versus just the C-17 fleeting visits, I'd like to see if I can make a difference overseas on a more larger scale.
You're a real 21st century servicewoman. Absolute epitome of the modern Australian Air Force. How do you find when you're walking through the streets going to get your cup of coffee and you might have left the base for a bit, or you just need to be passing through town and you're in uniform? How does the day-to-day reaction of the public greet you?
I still am not used to the looks. They're not positive or negative looks. They're just, someone in uniform, a civilian will look at you. And then being a 28-year-old female, I don't think the stereotypical soldier looks like I look, but I'm proud of it. And I'm proud of what we achieve as an Air Force and what we achieve as a Defence Force. So I don't make a point of going through town in my uniform, but when I do, I sort of wear it with pride. It's very interesting being in the modern Air Force, and a lot of my civilian friends back home don't quite understand exactly what it is I do, and they're still stuck in the thinking I crawl through mud and sort of do chin-ups on my way to work. But in reality, it's just a normal job.
You mentioned before we started recording that you'd also been overseas in the States and you'd been in uniform. Can you recount that story for me?
So a part of our C-17 training for all aircraft technicians is to go to the base. American C-17s do their training and learn from the Americans. It's about a 11, 12-week course. So I was lucky enough to go over there to McCord Fort Lewis Air Force Base in Seattle, Washington, and their base is massive. So being at a Starbucks on my way to work in uniform on an American base was just proof that we are part of a much bigger sort of military worldwide with our coalition partners, but a Vietnam veteran who was easily identifiable by, his hat and his badges and his age, came up to me in the Starbucks line, shook my hand, said thank you for your service. I sort of let him know I wasn't an American, but thank you. He said it doesn't matter, we're all part of the one team, and he asked if he could buy my coffee, to which I refused and said I think I should be buying yours, and then we squabbled, and it wasn't until my sergeant sort of reached over and whispered, please, Cassie, let him just buy you the coffee. And we sat down and we chatted for 10 minutes before work. So it's very different. Again, when you walk down the street over there in America in uniform, people will smile at you, people will come and shake your hand, young children will wave. It's very different over in America. It's very humbling, that's for sure.
We're a country, I think, that prides ourselves on honouring and respecting our veterans, and the fervour around Anzac Day and, to an extent, Remembrance Day. But we don't have that consistently all the year round per se, whereas you have a Vietnam veteran in America just coming up to you and saying thank you very much on a random day of the week. Where do you think that cultural difference comes from?
I'm unsure. I asked myself the same question. So in America, where I was stationed, they had Military Monday, where a whole bunch of restaurants and cafes did a 20% discount on food and beverages. I think it has something to do with the mainstream media and the way they portray their servicemen and women in America. There's a lot of flag waving on TV and welcome home parades. There's a lot of hero-esque movies from Hollywood. Whereas in Australia, I think we're the quiet achievers. I think a lot of Australian military just go overseas, do their job, and then come home to their families.
I'd also describe you as a quiet achiever, Cassie, and doing this podcast, trying to find people to put their hands up and participate. It's difficult. People sometimes don't want to tell their stories because it's too hard, or they don't want to relive moments. But most of the time, if there's any hesitation, it's because they say, I don't have much to say. You don't want to hear from me. And I heard similar comments to that effect from you. What made you put your hand up and agree to be interviewed today? And why do you think we have this different quiet achievers attitude in Australia, where we also have the love of our diggers and the legacy of Gallipoli so much in our cultural identity?
So today, I think I spoke to my boyfriend at length about coming on today and said the same thing. I'm not a World War II hero. I've only been in the military 8 years. And he said, yes, but your background, you're a female mechanic on one of Australia's biggest cargo planes, and then you flew a military aircraft solo upside down, albeit a very small military aircraft. You still got to fly aerobatics solo in uniform. So he said, everyone has their own story, and he's like, just use it as a platform to educate peers. And I think that's part of our disconnect in Australia between, when you say veteran, I would say most Australians think of the, older gentlemen from the World War I, World War II, Vietnam era, and no one ever instantly thinks of the, 35-year-old father who's come home from Afghanistan or Iraq without a leg. I think we disconnect. I think we don't think of veterans from a broad perspective, genders, Army, Navy, Air Force, and all campaigns, whereas Americans do. They will thank a World War, I or II veteran just as much as they'll thank a current day Iraq veteran.
Tell me about the time you flew the aircraft upside down.
So after a certain amount of flights at the Air Force's basic flying training school in Tamworth, you go for a fly with an instructor. Once he deems you safe and competent, he signs you off and then he waves goodbye. And it's not...
That sounds reassuring.
Yeah, it's very reassuring. It's not the first time you go solo. Before that, you do circuit solo, which is where you just fly up and around the aerodrome. So you get a bit of a practice being up there alone. I still remember the first time I ever took off solo. I felt like, I'm glad no one was listening. It was kind of like I was on a roller coaster. It was just a whole lot of squealing. Very professionally. And then from there, a few more flights later, a few more weeks later, when they're more and more confident in your ability and your safety, you sort of, like I was mentioning, they wave goodbye and you fly about 30 nautical miles away from the aerodrome to a training area, like a specific safe area. And then you have a set left and right of what you can and can't do while you're solo and what you've been checked off. And we'd been checked off safe solo for aerobatics. So you're allowed to do aileron rolls, loops, and a few other manoeuvres out in the training area, which was probably the second most incredible point in my career. Just being in an aircraft all alone, it just all of a sudden got very quiet. The radios seemed very quiet, and It was, a pretty proud moment going from never really flying an aircraft before I went to pilot's course through to by myself 30 miles from an airport, upside down. It was absolutely exhilarating.
That sounds so awesome. I am very jealous. Well, Cassie, your passion and energy is fantastic to watch, and I think our Air Force is very lucky to have you in it. Thank you for coming and speaking with me today.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Alex.
That was my conversation with Cassie Collins. If you enjoyed the conversation, please let us know by leaving a 5-star rating and review in iTunes. It helps our rankings in Apple Podcasts, which spreads these inspiring Australian stories to a wider audience. Learn more about us on our website, www.lifeonthelinepodcast.com. Like us on Facebook and Instagram at Life on the Line Podcast and on Twitter at LOTLPod. Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design, music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Have a special Anzac Day tomorrow. And when we say those 3 words after the Ode of Remembrance, think of servicemen and servicewomen like Cassie Collins and their stories, lest we forget.